It's my pleasure to introduce Kate Nocera, class of 2001. Kate, welcome back. Kate was a 6-year day student at Williston, and during her time here she played varsity tennis, was a devotee of winter fitness, if I have that right, and was something of a theater groupie. Apparently her acting career peaked in her junior year when she played the Pepper Chef in Alice in Wonderland. You can say something about that later, I hope? In June 2001, a long time ago, Kate was inducted into the Cum Laude Society at graduation. Kate graduated from UMass Amherst in 2007 with a degree in sociology and received her master's in journalism from the City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism in 2009. She was a cops and crime reporter for a year at the New York Daily News and moved to DC, where she covered healthcare and Congress for Politico. She then moved on to become the senior congressional reporter at BuzzFeed, probably a site you guys are familiar with, where she was the recipient of the National Press Foundation's 2014 Dirksen Award for Distinguished Coverage of Congress. Incidentally, Kate told me that if she was still doing that job, she'd be freezing in Iowa right now covering the upcoming caucuses. Kate briefly worked for SKDR Knickerbocker, a public relations and political consulting firm that specializes in working for nonprofit, corporate, and advocacy clients, as well as Democratic Party politicians, before recently settling into a position as the senior editor for Vox Media's in-house ad agency. As Kate likes to say, she is still figuring out what she wants to be when she grows up. Kate currently lives in DC with her fiance Mike, who's here today, along with her mother, who's here today, who lives in Northampton, and their dog Max and cat Gary are also denizens of her home. Please give me a warm Williston welcome in welcoming back Kate Nocera, class of 2001.
Hi, it's really nice to be back here. Can you, freshmen in the back, can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, playing the Pepper Chef was one of my favorite memories at Williston. But my actual favorite memory at Williston was being at graduation and hearing them call the names of the Cum Laude inductees and hearing my name among them. I think we were all in a little bit of shock when that happened. It's my favorite memory because it almost never happened. And I have Mr. Pilgrim's permission to tell this story, but when we graduated and I was shaking everyone's hand and he looked at the ribbon around my neck and just said, "What, you got that?" And then he said, I actually just can't believe you graduated. So thank you very much for the vote of confidence, Mr. Pilgrim. Honestly though, I really couldn't believe it either. I want to say sincere congratulations to all the inductees today. I remember how hard this place is, and truly you should feel so proud of the work you've done. I used to sit in Cum Laude assemblies year after year and think, man, how do they do it? That seems like so much work. That's because I spent a lot of my life here from 7th to 12th grade, and I struggled to get through a good chunk of it. Especially in 9th and 10th grade, I ran into what a lot of my teachers and my parents like to call issues. I spent a lot of time in the Dean of Students' office. My mom got several voicemails from Mr. Talea during that period of time. And I just wasn't that smart about being bad. I would skip class or practice to hang out in downtown Northampton, and I would do so directly in front of my dad's office. I'd come home and he would ask me how swimming practice or tennis practice was, and I'd say it was great, and he would just look at me and say, you know, I just saw you downtown, like you were right there, I could see you. So that didn't go very well. It was probably not surprising that at that point my grades were not great, and there were a lot of people here though that had more faith in me than I had in myself and pushed me to do better. They helped me realize I had loftier ambitions than being a kid who skipped school to hang out downtown. So I got my act together, I pushed to get into honors classes, and I slowly worked my way towards cum laude. I still remember how proud I felt on graduation day. I don't really remember what the commencement speaker said, or what any speaker at any assembly ever said, except for Mr. Teller's annual button talk, which I sincerely hope is still a thing, and you guys know what I'm talking about. There's no speaker that's going to give you the one piece of advice that's going to change your life. That advice doesn't exist, but I'll try and give you some tips I've learned along the way in the 15 years since I graduated. So you can all feel very old now, or at least I do. What I learned then and what I'm still learning now is that you build your life one day at a time. You make a lot of choices and you learn from them. Other people in your life will help you in expected and unexpected ways. Every day you get to decide what you want to be when you grow up. I am still figuring that out, as Mr. Hill said. There will be times, many times along the way, where you'll feel like a lost soul. When you'll look up all your high school friends on Instagram and see their lives through a cool filter, and you'll think they have it together, and that they're on a straight path to success. They're not, no one is, that doesn't exist. Everyone has their ups and downs, and you may see some really good selfies in between. After Williston, I went to Hamilton College, a small liberal arts school in upstate New York. But after 2 years, it became clear it wasn't the right place for me. So I went home to figure out what I really wanted to do. It wasn't fun to be off the 4 years of go to college, graduate, move to the city, get a job path. It actually felt really terrible. But I came back home and I took some time off to think about how I wanted to spend the rest of my college career and decided to go up the road to UMass Amherst. I commuted from my apartment downtown. I took the classes I was truly interested in. I was focused, which is surprising at UMass, but it happened, I promise. UMass was the first place I ever took a journalism class, and where, for the first time, I thought maybe journalism was something I was meant to do. When I graduated, I moved to New York to try and make something happen in the journalism world, and I made a lot of things happen, just not journalism. It turns out it's a hard business to break into if you have zero experience. So I worked as an assistant to a realtor who was not a very good broker, despite fancying herself one. I worked at a boutique divorce law firm where I was the front desk receptionist and watched a lot of really rich people fight over money. I worked at Trader Joe's. I've been a barista many, many times over, and I was once a manager of a coffee shop. Thank you very much. My resume was starting to look like a BuzzFeed list of 27 jobs you'd never expect a Williston graduate to have. And reporter at BuzzFeed or anywhere else was not on that list yet. I realized I was going to need some more experience and more education if I wanted to actually break into reporting. So, in classic Kate Nocera fashion, I found out that the deadline to apply to journalism school was 2 weeks away, and I signed up for the GRE that day, sent in my application, and by some miracle, I got in. I got a lot out of journalism school, though, including some of my best friends in the universe. I met people in their 30s and 40s, starting second careers, people who, like me, were still in the process of figuring it all out. Being a journalist put me in all sorts of situations with all sorts of people I would never have been in otherwise. I loved asking questions and getting answers. You get to ask all the questions you want, and you get to ask them to people like Nancy Pelosi, Rand Paul, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. You also get to ask questions of people less famous, who are struggling, hurt, and need their stories told. When I graduated from J School, that's what you get to call journalism school when you graduate, I worked for the New York Daily News as a general assignment reporter. A typical day in the life of a general assignment reporter is something like, hey, this bad thing happened, go to that neighborhood where the bad thing happened and write about it. So I saw a lot of violence and tragedy, but I also saw a lot of good in people too. One of the first stories I was sent to cover was about a young man who was shot and killed in the Bronx. It seemed very random and senseless, and it was my job to go and try and interview his mom. I had to knock on her door that morning and say, hello, I'm with the newspaper. Would you like to tell me about your son? She not only let me in, she made me coffee and told me his life story. I was inserting myself into the worst moment of this woman's life, and she decided to let me in. She cried on my shoulder. She told me about her son's recent graduation, his new job. It was one of those moments where I realized just how incredibly lucky I was to be doing what I was doing. But I've also had people slam the door in my face, and worse, when they didn't feel like being interviewed. And every day was a new adventure with new questions to ask. I was starting to get some of that experience I needed to really break into the field, so I moved from New York to DC and started working at Politico, covering healthcare policy and then Congress. And in 2013, I moved to BuzzFeed News, which at that point was still a pretty new thing on Capitol Hill. But it was scrappy and fun and one of the best things I've ever done. When I was reporting for BuzzFeed, I spent my days and sometimes my nights in the halls of our nation's capital asking the tough questions of the people who write our laws. I also spent a lot of time trying to explain what BuzzFeed was to octogenarian members of Congress. But it was hard to describe how cool it was to just walk into that building every day. I interviewed Bernie Sanders before he decided to run for president, and let me tell you that no one has ever hated being interviewed as much as that man. Someone in his office clearly told him that doing an interview with BuzzFeed would be cool and hip, and he did not buy that. I was part of a team that did a huge amount of work covering Congress's inability to pass a new war authorization, and we won the National Press Foundation's Dirksen Award for distinguished coverage of Congress, one of the nation's top reporting prizes, making BuzzFeed one of the first ever online-only publications to win, and that still feels good. I traveled the country covering Marco Rubio in 2014 when he was supposedly campaigning for other candidates and clearly practicing running for president. I got to smoke a cigarette with John Boehner when he was Speaker of the House. And so that leads me to my first piece of advice, which is don't smoke. It's really bad. I recently quit smoking. It made John Boehner's teeth terrible, and his office was so disgusting he wasn't allowed to have paintings from the Smithsonian in there. So, don't start. I was away a lot, living the reporter life of being on the road, staying out too late, eating Subway sandwiches 5 times a week because that's the only option when you're reporting from middle of nowhere, Iowa. And then I got really tired, and it stopped being as fun as it once was. I loved what I did in journalism. I knew I'd done incredible, important things, but I'd gotten to a point in my life where I was ready to make a change. I had found a career I was really good at, but that doesn't mean it was good for me. So it was time to ask that question again, what else do I want to be when I grow up? And I feel really good about my choice to do something else. Sometimes I'm a little sad I'm not out there with my former colleagues covering the election, but then I realize spending every day explaining why Donald Trump is still in the lead probably isn't the life I want to have. Some of the best people I know, and the ones I most look up to in the world, have had several careers. I've had a million jobs and one whole career already, so I feel like I'm on the right track. So here's my second piece of advice, and I hope you'll find it useful now, even if you forget it was me who said it in like 10 years. In every job you have every job you're going to have, find someone you respect and look up to, and ask them a lot of questions. Ask them for advice; they'll give it to you. The good thing about having so many different jobs is that I now have an excellent collection of mentors. And if there's anything that's going to help you get through life and make better decisions, it's to ask as many questions as possible. So do it. Because someday the vice president might look at you in the halls of the Senate and say, "Do you have a question?" And you should have one ready for him. And I didn't, and it was terrible, and that's another story. Finally, I'll tell you the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, and this one I happen to remember very well. I was about to go on my first assignment covering a press conference, and I was working at the Daily News in New York, and I asked my supervisor, "Do you have any advice?" And all he said was, "Don't screw it up." So on the way to the press conference, I got 2 calls from the photographer I was working with imploring me to hurry. I was convinced I was screwing up. I got there just in time, though, to get the quotes I needed for the piece, and I did my best. At the end of the day, I got a story published. It wasn't great, but I learned from it. It was a start. So the good news is that you won't screw it up, actually, in the end. Even things that feel like mistakes at the time will teach you something. I learned that day to always be at least 10 minutes early to press conferences. Your mistakes will help you make better decisions the next time. When I left journalism, I went to go be a PR consultant briefly. The most important lesson I learned there is that PR consulting is not for me. It wasn't a mistake. I did a good job. I just didn't love it. And so now I'm on the business side at Vox Media, another online media company. I took the job because I love journalism so much that I want to make sure it continues to exist. It's new, it's exciting, it's a different way to challenge myself. I get to work with a team of great people that's trying to figure out how to make revenue work in an industry that desperately needs it in a way that respects the integrity of reporting. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, you'll just have to trust me. It's a very cool job. So take risks. If something doesn't seem like it's working, there's probably a reason for that, and it's okay to try something new. Life is going to surprise you, so make big choices. You won't screw it up. Thank you, and congratulations to all of this year's Cum Laude inductees.
Got a little goodie bag for Kate, so as you collect jobs and stuff, you can put it in there.
Thank you
Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you. That was an awesome talk. Let's